And
situated.
Right.
yeah, that's falling over.
Hi, y'all.
Uh-huh.
Hey, check it out. That's not.
Am I going to lean back?
Yeah, you're going to want it.
Am
wherever
I?
you want it. I don't-
It'll probably
I
stay
feel
up.
like I'll be here.
How do you feel?
I feel comfy and warm.
Yeah.
I'm glad the
hot.
sun's coming in on the back of our necks.
I'm hot,
That's
too.
a good
I'm
one.
glad you're warm. I was worried.
Yeah, you're worried.
I feel like
Might have
I
been a
wanna
little
be
chilly.
back here.
You're gonna back it up?
Yeah, because I'm going to have to look.
Back it
too.
way up.
Is this
Back
okay?
it way up.
Back it way up.
Is that all right?
How's that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Yeah?
Sounds better?
We're loving
Okay.
this? Oh,
You want a close talker?
Stable is good.
I'm glad our stage moms are here.
Close talker.
That's
Stage
Chrissy.
moms in the back.
That's
It's
Chrissy.
really
She's
bringing me
stage
back
mom.
to my
Thank you
childhood,
very
y'all.
much.
Taryn's going to direct us next.
Oh, my God.
And we're sparkling.
And we're going.
Okay.
All right.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Brave New Work, a podcast about reinventing our organizations and the search for a more adaptive and human way of working. I'm Aaron Dignan. I'm joined by my co-host, Rodney Evans,
Hey,
as
y'all.
always.
Hey, hey.
And we are also joined by Brian Elliott, who's the co-founder of the Future Forum and an SVP at Slack, so kind of a big deal.
Hey. Howdy, folks.
Yeah. And on today's show, we're going to talk about something pretty different for us. We're going to debunk some workplace myths. But before we get around to the myth busting, those of you listening at home might be realizing that we sound a bit different this week, and you can hear some background noise. And that's because Rodney and I left our respective podcasting closets and took the show on the road.
We did. We're here. This is our first live show ever. So
Yes.
if we really screw it up badly, just be gentle.
And
The editors
We're
are
doing
so
our
good.
best.
And it's breezy, and it's 90 degrees,
It's breezy.
and it's about 85% humidity.
I
That's
mean,
right.
it's perfect conditions is what we've been
Ideal.
saying all day.
head
We
is
really
moist.
want to say thank you so much to Slack for having us. Slack knows that the future of work belongs to everybody, and we are here to rep that today in a conversation with you all about how to make work better. So let's get into it.
Absolutely. I feel, I don't know how many myths we're going to get through. Usually when we do an AMA show, we get about one question done.
We did 3 last time,
We
and
did
it was a
3
record.
questions, so that felt pretty good.
Yeah.
In 45 minutes.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
pretty nuts.
Yeah, that's cool.
We start every episode of Brave New Work off with a practice, Rodney.
We do.
And what is that practice?
The practice is a check-in round. Who here knows about check-in rounds? Yes! Y'all, for the people listening at home, we have 3 fans, and they are all familiar with this practice, and I couldn't be more delighted about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we start every meeting, but also every podcast with a check-in round for a few reasons that I will reiterate today. 1 is to get us present. 2 is to get to know each other better.
Yes.
3 is to have equal share of voice, which is very important for the democratization of conversations. And 4 is to start things on time so that we don't spend a lot of minutes talking to people about weather while we wait for the latecomers to show. So today will be no different. We will do a check-in round. The check-in round question, given where we are and in the theme of keeping Austin weird, is this one. Do you believe in ghosts or aliens or both? Tell me about it, Aaron.
Ghosts or aliens? All right, so I'm a hard yes on aliens because there are so many stars in the sky. And I am a no on ghosts except for
Come
the fact,
on,
hey, you get your
man.
chance. You'll get your chance. I am a no on ghosts except for the fact that I think maybe there's some interdimensional leakage happening. So maybe it's you from another dimension in the Black universe haunting yourself.
Is she doing a good job on this recording?
It's very good. Much better.
All right, Brian, what about you?
Oh, my God. Yes on aliens. They got to be around someplace.
Yeah.
I think most of the stuff that we shot down over Canada recently was more like the ham radio balloon than it was an
Yeah.
alien. But, someplace in the universe they have to exist. Ghosts, I'm going to say yes. There's just weird shit that happens every once in a while in places that you can't quite account for. That cold chill feeling you've got in the weird house.
Yeah.
That, let's put it this way. I must believe in it enough that every once in a while I get a little freaked out.
You're feeling the atmosphere.
And this is why Brian is the new co-host of Brave New Work.
Uh-oh, there's the announcement.
I obviously believe in ghosts. There's a ghost that lives in my lake house, and I communicate with him regularly. I invited him to leave, and he didn't, and so now we just chill. I'm pretty sure he lived there
What,
before.
does he do anything fun? Does he do tricks?
He sits on my chest in the night, which isn't that fun.
That's not so fun.
But he makes the trees make sounds.
Sounds like a cat.
So don't go visit the lake house with Rodney.
Don't. Or do,
Or
if you
do.
like ghosts.
Yeah.
All right,
All
so
right.
that's a check-in.
That's a check-in.
Well
We did
done,
it.
I think,
Yeah.
for the Austin edition.
All right.
All right, I'm going to break into workplace myths. So there've got to be thousands of myths about work right now that are holding us back. But today we picked 5 juicy ones to crack into with you all. And the first one is, and I'm going to throw this to you, Brian, right out of the gate.
Oh, good.
The person who is always busy is the person who is most productive. We have this myth that, like, if you're busy and you're there until 9, you're the good employee. And if you leave at 5, you're shit. So break it down.
Presenteeism and hustle culture. Here we go. Let's get at it. So here's the trick. I was really, really, really good at hustle culture.
Yeah.
Early in my career as a consultant, it's the, stay up, show up all night, be available all the time, and make it happen. And even now, we're still seeing this, whether it's like, hey, Johnny shows up early and Johnny stays late, so therefore Johnny deserves a promotion.
Right.
Or all the stuff around, like, how many lines of code has someone written?
Oh, yeah.
Or how
That's a
long
classic.
is the green, notification button on during the day?
In Slack?
In Slack. Those are not good measures of whether or not you're doing the thing you want to do as an organization, which is deliver outcomes.
Right.
So one of the things we talk about a lot is the training and the work that goes into helping people focus on what are the outcomes for their business. And this is really important for a couple reasons. Number one, it's just good management, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to drive outcomes, that's what we want to focus on, not showing up. But the other is we do this Future Forum Pulse every quarter, past 2.5 years now. 10,000 desk workers, people who can take a laptop home with them to do work. And what it showed in the most recent version was burnout at an all-time high.
Yeah.
So 42% of the global desk workforce is burnt out at work. Post-pandemic, you'd think this would be getting better, but I think it's the combination of the pressures that people are feeling from an economic perspective, together with a little bit more focus on presenteeism and hustle culture that's really making people a little bit crazy. And it's not good for business either, because if you're burned out at work, you're 23% less productive. It's having the exact opposite impact that you want it to have by saying to people, show up early, stay late.
I love that you have all the stats.
Yeah, they're just
I'm a stat.
They're
like,
right there.
Look, the notes.
They're right there.
Notes.
He doesn't need notes. He's a human calculator. I hate it.
Really?
This show should be called I Hate It.
Uh-huh.
I hate it. Here's what I hate almost as much as mugs that say live, laugh, love. Mugs that say rise and grind.
Yeah.
Let's not rise and grind. Let's thoughtfully enter our day and do the deep knowledge work that we're paid for and have the kind of impact that we're trying to have, rather than doing this performative stuff that just like burns out our adrenals and makes us feel like we're busy and valuable and engaged and important, and ultimately doesn't really add up to that much for our companies, but more importantly in terms of our lives and actually feeling like we're spending our time in a way that's valuable. And like, this is one of the reasons that I'm mostly staying off Twitter these days is because of how glorified hustle culture is, and how many
Especially right
people
now.
Here we come.
are just talking to each other about, like, if my new employee isn't in the office doing X, Y, and Z, then how can I know, or how can I trust? Or
Yeah, bro.
And it's just
Yeah.
like it's all of that thing, and I could do without all of it, frankly.
Painful.
Yeah. So let's not.
I do feel like the pattern is something like, if I have a blind spot over here, then a myth or a pattern evolves over here. And so as the leader, it's like, since I don't actually know what our outcomes are, I'm just going to do surveillance management.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just
That's
be
right.
like, if everybody's here, then something's happening.
Yeah.
And as opposed to like, actually, where are we going and what's happening? So I feel I'm with you on that.
It takes work.
Yeah.
And a little bit of training. And a little
Exactly.
A little
support.
bit of training. I also
Maybe
think
some therapy.
it begs the question. I do feel like part of hustle culture is, from managers and leaders particularly, a desire to have employees whose first priority is work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have real questions about that as an identity. Because, like, I love my job profoundly. It is a huge part of who I am and a huge part of what I identify with. And I would be deeply sus of anyone who's like, this is my whole personality.
Right.
And so the fact that we are basically rewarding that behavior through all of the signaling that we're talking about is scary.
Yeah.
It's scary for the culture.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Myth number 2.
Let's do it.
Are you ready?
Keep
Was that
cracking
good?
'em.
Did we do that right?
I feel like that one's in the pan.
Jack, cut this part out. I'm sorry. Okay. Myth
Poor Jack.
number poor Jack on so many fronts. Myth number 2. I'm so excited to talk about this. It is compensation is the most important thing when picking a new role. So I'm going to start by saying I just went to a retreat recently. It was an all-women retreat, and there were a lot of very successful women there. And I was having conversations with a couple of them over dinners who are in career transitions. And the conversation always started with the number.
Yeah.
The number, like, evaluating first based on the number, then based on the company, then based on the work, then based on everything else. And I was just like, wow, these are wildly successful people who have a deeply flawed understanding of how life works. And so I want to I want to completely boggle tournament compensation.
That's great.
What say you, Brian?
So here's what's wild. I'll give you the stats first, then my own story. If you look at our research, what people rate as most important in driving their satisfaction at work is compensation number 1, flexibility number 2.
Is that right?
It does,
Wow.
but let's go deeper. Lauren Rubin, one of the researchers on the team, actually dug into it and said, let's look at people who recently switched a job.
Okay.
And let's take it a little bit in a different place, and let's ask them, what was the trigger that got you to switch jobs?
Yeah.
And number 1, career growth. Right? I'm
Interesting.
stymied. I'm not growing. I'm not learning any longer. The other one was if you cut people who had a lot of flexibility at work and that was being taken away, flexibility goes to number 1, right?
Right.
You're screwing with my life. You're basically messing with my ability to live a decent life on
Yeah.
top of this. And so those 2 factors showed up really strongly. For myself, I've done this thing that's, turns out, I found out from Lauren, it wasn't Sheryl Sandberg that had the monkey bars in the jungle gym versus the ladder. It's not a ladder, it's
Right.
monkey bars. I've done this like 5 times myself. So CEO of a startup company, went to Google, less comp, went from managing 350 people to 2. One of whom quit on the first day. We won't go into that today. But then grew and learned a ton at Google, jumped from Google where I had about 1,000 people working for me by the end to Slack, which has been fantastic. But each time it was because I got a different opportunity, something new, and it wasn't the hierarchical, like I got more compensation or a bigger team. It was, I'm kind of getting bored. I don't feel like I'm learning anything any longer.
Yeah.
I don't want to stretch myself, and I want to be with people that I want to be with. I
Yeah.
think that's the other one we skipped.
I feel like, and I'm suspect of a lot of the other trappings that kind of go around this, like title. Like,
Yeah.
is title
Totally.
just a proxy for money?
Yes.
Is career growth just a proxy for money?
Can be.
Like, when people talk
Eh.
about that
I
stuff.
mean, they're
what
all
it-
just proxies for ego.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. And that I think that's exactly it, which is like when you start to look at the pattern, and this is something I've been playing with a lot lately. You and I've been talking about it, but like a lot of the pattern is just more.
Yeah.
How do I
Yeah.
get more?
Yeah.
More people working for me, more span of control, more title, more money, more, as opposed to like better.
Yeah.
What's a better fit for me? What's a better balance? What feels more authentic to me? What feels enlivening? So
Yeah.
it's part of the broader culture, I think, of work, which is even the business itself is focused on more,
Yeah.
and so is everybody inside it.
Yep.
Yeah. And since it's easy for me to just talk about things I hate without giving solutions, I'm going to. Here's how I've been thinking about this in conversations I'm having with friends over beers who are looking for jobs. I'm like, don't worry about what you made before. Don't worry about what other people make. Think about the life that you want to have and what it costs you. Like, I love money. I mean, so
She
much.
does.
I love money so much. And also, more every year, more than this other person, more than my last job, is a really stupid measure of money. Like, money is freedom, and money is nice things, and money is lots of things, but just more money is nothing.
Yeah.
So I've been encouraging people to think about what the life is that they want to have and what it would take to afford that life, and try to shut out some of the other noise and like the hedonistic treadmill vibe that comes with comp and title.
That's awesome.
Have you guys go on YouTube if you want and watch Clay Christensen's How Will You Measure Your Life?
Yeah.
Right, his TED Talk on that. Parts of it haven't aged terribly well, but it's actually really great overall because what it says at the end of it is, look, all of the material trappings, all of the stuff that people count in terms of hierarchy, title, compensation, whether you get the private jet or not, etc., is not the kind of thing that you sit there later in life and go, I wish I'd had more of that.
Yeah.
Sure.
What you miss is the time with the kids, the time with friends, the time with family, and all the interactions. And at the end of the day, that's actually how you're going to probably measure it yourself as well.
Yeah.
So start doing it now.
That tracks, actually. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the guest had been working. The guest was actually a celebrity actress, and she'd been working in hospice care. And
Oh,
she
wow.
was like, all they talk about is people I've loved, friends, and travel.
That's amazing.
All the people talk about. And it's
Yep.
like, there's got to be a clue in there somewhere about how to think about it.
Travel.
All right, should we shift gears to 3?
Let's do it.
Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, let's see here. Myth number 3, all of this future of work talk is only for leaders. And if you aren't at the top, there's nothing you can do to make changes at work. This is an attitude we run into a lot in our day jobs where you
Yep.
get with a group and they're like, we don't have the power to change anything.
Yep.
And then you kind of scratch under the surface and find out more. So, Rodney, why don't you break that myth down a little bit?
Okay. No one cares what you do at work. That's the thing. This took me a really long time to learn because our systems are set up in an explicit way to make us feel like we're being surveilled. But actually, no one really cares how you organize your day, what your team meetings are like, what your working agreements are, et cetera, et cetera.
They barely know their own.
They don't have any. Don't have any clarified with anybody else. So it's like I think we impose a lot of constraints on ourselves at work around things that are very likely to be unnoticed by other people. So like we sort of like coined this term in some research that we were doing recently of the twilight zone. And the twilight zone is like a layer of the ocean that is just below where the sun reaches.
Yeah.
And I think about the way that a team works and the way that you are at work as mostly being stuff in the twilight zone. Like there's stuff at the surface that the sun touches that's like the remote work policy and the vacation policy and the compensation structure. And then there's the giant twilight zone that's like choose your own adventure. Nobody can see you. And that's where I want individuals and teams to really access the agency that they have, because I just find that mostly we impose constraints on ourselves because we're interpreting what's coming from above versus clarifying actually how much space we have to do whatever we want. And usually what I find is that as individuals and teams start experimenting with different meeting types, different agreement making, different structuring their own workflows, they like increase their courage as they go and have success.
Yeah. Brian, what do you think?
So I agree with all that. I think what I hear a lot from people that are sort of mid to senior level in an organization is, yeah, but the broader organization won't let us do that. And that usually has something to do with meetings and time and schedules, right?
Totally.
Like you're booking me all times, day and night. When we look at the research, what we see is executives actually do have more flexibility. So there is a little bit of this to the leaders. Like executives have 3 times more flexibility in their work schedules. They report it 3 times higher than their middle managers do.
Okay.
That's not great. So, but what can you do at a team level? All kinds of stuff. Within our own team, we set up our own team agreement around things like core collaboration hours. So 9 a.m. until 1 o'clock on the Pacific Coast time is the time for our meetings, one-on-ones, cross-team meetings, all that. It takes work. It takes discipline. It takes talking to your research partners, your comms partners, and saying, hey, you just put that weekly review session on for 3 o'clock on Wednesdays. That's 6 o'clock for Taryn and Anna on the East Coast. Pull it back in. But if you put the work against it, then it can go a really long way. And the other thing is like finding ways to experiment and iterate on stuff like that can grow to other teams. So Slack started doing this set of practices around what we now call Maker Weeks in our product design and engineering team in August of 2020. And the first time we did it, Maker Week is take 1 week and cancel all your recurring meetings.
Yeah.
Just kill them all off and give yourself a break and use a little bit of that time back to recuperate. In August of 2020, everybody was so burned out with so many meetings, they said, we need a break. That worked so well that they started doing it once a quarter.
Okay.
Then it became twice a quarter. Then the marketing team picked it up. But what happened along the way was we then said, hey, sales and customer success team, we want you guys doing this too. But we had to actually invest with them on how do you turn some of the meetings that you've got into more asynchronous ways of working?
Exactly.
So the product teams easily figured out how to do a stand-up asynchronously, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't that hard. For sales teams, though, figuring out how do you run the weekly pipeline review asynchronously? Easy enough if you sit there and say, so you got to have the data updated by Monday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by 5 o'clock, what I need is in this channel, in this thread, give me all your status updates. By the way, you can do it in text, or you can record a short video clip of yourself and do it. But it takes that kind of effort and customization.
Yeah.
And if someone in your organization is trying, learn from them and then take it further.
Yeah, it is funny you brought up meetings, because I think meetings are most of the day for most people, and they're the place, to Rodney's point, where a lot of what goes on in them is in the twilight zone. And that's why we often start there, because at the end of the day, it's like a microcosm of the organization, and it's happening 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day, 7 hours a day in some cases, sometimes more. And so you can actually go there and start to dismantle, often without too much support or air cover.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad that you brought up the asynchrony piece, because I think right now what's happening is we all went to remote during the pandemic, and it was like, oh, doing remote work just means doing everything on Zoom.
Yeah.
And then to your point about burnout earlier, everybody did so much of that and just the tax of that time on all of our emotional state was so much that now we're all really worn out, and we're realizing it can't just be that we try to recreate what we did in the office 8 hours a day on Zoom.
Right.
We need to actually re-engineer how things get done, and that's where automation comes in, and that's where thinking about what we can off-put to something asynchronous goes in, and even a place where AI starts to play. Because I mean, I've had at least 2 occasions in the last couple months where the need for a meeting was eradicated by just asking ChatGPT, what does it do? And I think Slack's
great.
playing with AI now too, right?
We are.
Yeah.
The OpenAI team built a chat app
So
for
there you
Slack.
go. I mean, that's
awesome.
going to change things.
Think about thread summarizations, right?
Yeah.
Or think
Yeah.
about the kickstart on that memo that you need to write for an executive at some outside company.
Oh, yeah.
Like, give me the research and give me the 100-word version, give me the 50-word version.
Sweet.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Absolutely. The other thing that both of your comments sparked for me is just a lot of these ways of working that have gotten like very famous, like no meeting Mondays or stand-ups or pick your mythology from business book and insert it here. Like they started somewhere. They started
Right.
with some experiment somewhere, and now it feels like those things that are like best practice and tested are really easy to adopt. But like we have to keep making up new ones to serve the environment. We can't just rely on the experiments that were conducted 10 years ago and are now acceptable to leaders in
Right.
order to
Yeah.
do this.
Right.
And-
It feels slow.
Yeah, you got to
I
angle
like
it up a
it's
bit.
moving
Yeah.
on me.
I wish people spent more time talking about this and worried about it, to be honest. So
Right.
much of the conversation these days is still, 3 years later, how many days a week somebody needs to be in the office.
Oh, totally.
Right? All the
Wild.
time and energy we're spending on that.
Like it's
we
a
know
fundamental
flexibility.
physics question or something.
It's horrible. We spend so much time debating that. We see in our research, if you have location flexibility, on average, people are about 8% more productive, which is good. It's basically saving
a
you
lot.
about 3 hours a week, which is half the commute,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That you
Yeah,
get
yeah,
back
yeah.
to the organization. Schedule flexibility. Putting some container around that 9 to 5 or worse 8 until 8, where we can turn your calendar into all meetings or Swiss cheese, where you have no 2-hour blocks to get work done, is a killer. If you give people limits and schedule flexibility, less than 9 to 5 being available for meetings, 39% boost to productivity.
Yeah.
And the other thing is executives should agree, and in fact they do. We just had this data that we released this week. Almost executives, when you ask them, do you think there's waste in meetings in your organization? The average number that execs say are wasteful is 46% of
Sweet.
meetings.
Half of them.
Nearly half of all meetings are
That's
waste,
wild.
which is not a good use of your time.
No.
So let's focus there instead. Leverage the experimentation frameworks, learn from what other people have done, and do more asynchronously, as well as have the time together you need with your team for relationship building.
Totally.
I'm glad that you said productivity too, because we were talking a little bit in prep for this podcast about the fact that like sometimes productivity means outcomes get done, but sometimes the measure of productivity is actually just more hamster wheel treadmill measurement.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, when you say productivity, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Do you mean lines of code, or do you mean we're actually shipping the product customers want?
Yeah.
And so I think when someone says that at work, taking a closer look and being like, oh, what do you mean when you say we're more productive if we come to the office?
Yeah, exactly.
And what does that actually look like?
I also just think we haven't yet talked about anything in terms of like Jedi in this conversation.
Yeah.
I also think that, fundamentally the way that most workplaces are designed is for one particular kind of person to
What
be
do they look
comfortable.
like, Rodney?
I don't know, Aaron. You?
Do they have a corner office?
Yeah, they love it. They love managing by walking around. It turns out. But even in terms of like cognitive diversity and learning style and work
Yep.
type, regardless of people who have different levels of commitment and caretaking and commute, et cetera, like the flexibility that we need needs to be more available. And I think it is generally easier for leaders to say, we will design the experiments. We will find what the next big unlock is in terms of ways of working. And usually those are the same people who don't need the level of flexibility that
Yeah.
those who work for them do, which is kind of nonsense. So I'm like, what I want to see is the authority and the agency to do the things that you're both talking about for the people who actually need it, which
Right.
is usually not the top of the house, because those are the people who have help at home, who can take a Friday off whenever they want to without checking with anyone,
Right.
who can work remotely without approval for anybody. Like, they are not the ones who need to have the room for experimentation. It's everybody else who has actual constraint outside of work.
And that's all. I also think it's part of what's actually driving some of this too. Is we talk with a lot of people, and what you hear from executives sometimes is, I don't feel like I have my finger on the pulse of the organization.
Right.
And there's this nervousness that's showing up.
It is like that.
I did that.
It's just like that.
They do this.
Yeah.
You've seen this
They
like
need the
100
hit.
bazillion times.
Everybody's
Yeah, that's
touching
right.
their arm.
And what's happening is executives, as they started coming back in, and as the economy starts tightening, when you went back like 2008, 2009, when all that was happening, everybody assumed the office was the place it all happened. So you went in and you kind of heard the buzz and you heard the conversations. If executives are coming back now and the office is quieter and they're not hearing the hum and the buzz, then they're feeling like they don't have their finger on the pulse. But the other thing that's happened that we run into all the time as Slack in particular is executives themselves often sit there and say, well, look, Slack's great for the team. It's wonderful. Yes, it makes them more productive and they have a great time with it, but it's not for me. I'm over here in email, right?
Yeah.
Find me over here in email, which is always lovely. And the challenge then is they're missing the conversation. They're missing the buzz because it is still happening.
Yeah.
The team that's planning the next big account close, the team that's actually sitting there with the product launch, they're all having the conversations. They're just having them digitally. But two generations of digital natives in the workforce versus, this is a podcast, I'm 55, I'll say it out loud. I'm not a digital native. It takes time, education, and support for executives to learn and understand how to get in there and use these tools effectively and to have fun in them.
Absolutely.
You ready for another myth?
I kind of am.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
Okay, this one is going to be juicy. I'm very excited to talk about this. I want to talk about feelings at work because there is a myth that is floating around. It's on Twitter a lot. It's the rise and grind people who also love this one, which is we should leave feelings at the door and they don't have a place at work. Incidentally, I also feel like the same executives who read something about people bringing their whole selves to work also tell me about no feelings at work. And I'm like, tell me how you're splitting the humans then. This is interesting to me. So Brian, why don't you start us off? What do you think about feelings at work?
What are your feelings on feelings?
Yeah,
What are my feelings on feelings? Again, former early days consultant who was also told the same thing, hustle culture.
Sure.
And check your feelings at the door, right? Like, just grind it out. I may have had a manager once upon a time. God, I'm getting really personal on this one. I got divorced early on. And I had a manager say, I know you're going through a divorce, but that didn't excuse your performance on this project.
Wow.
So that's about as extreme as it gets, right?
That's pretty bad.
We don't talk any longer. We're not good friends. But I think part of the challenge is how do you help people understand that there are boundaries also, right? So our own team has a norm around the fact that we want people to have vulnerabilities with boundaries, right? It's really important that as a team, we support each other, we encourage each other, we're there for each other, we're giving each other space when we need a break or when something else is going on that's going wrong in your life, and that we're recognizing those challenges in you. But at the end of the day, we're not really a family and we're not your therapist.
Sure.
So like, how do you help people find those boundary conditions between these? And when you talk to executives, I've found sometimes it's helpful to say, look, bring your whole self to work doesn't mean that you want to turn your managers into therapists. But it does mean that you got to recognize the fact that people have lives and their lives have challenges in them, and helping them deal with that is important. The other thing that really happens is helping people express emotion at work really matters. Emojis are a great way to express an emotion, right? Knowing and tracking whether or not the message that you put in an announcements channel for a new product launch got thousands of people excited internally versus only 10 tells you something.
Sure.
That is signal within your organization about what's going on. And those sort of emotional signals are also really valuable even from a business perspective.
I'm totally unqualified to talk about this.
And yet you will.
I'll play jazz.
Do it. You have feelings at work.
I do.
You have a lot of feelings about
I have a lot of
this.
feelings at work.
Yeah.
There's stuff down with some Irish background. No, I think the no place at work thing is connected to professionalism.
Yeah.
And I think the really insidious way that this developed over the course of the last 100, 200 years was, what does it mean to be a professional? And to be a professional means that you always have your stuff together, you're always ready, you have poise, you have confidence, you know what you're doing, and you're not derailed, you're not able to be put off guard or off track, you're reliable and consistent. And so much of modern management is about, can I make the world reliable and consistent so that we hit earnings, so that we grow consistently, so that performance is a given? And this becomes this impediment to that when you're like, oh, but the problem is the whole machine is not a machine.
Yeah.
It's a garden full of humans, and they're not reliable and consistent. So what are we going to do about that? Well, what we'll do is we'll brainwash them for many generations to be like, when you step through this door, you need to don a different identity, and that identity is a mask.
Yep.
And the mask doesn't have emotions. It just is productive. And so I think that we've subscribed to that at a societal level, and then to a certain degree, we've also subscribed to that in different subcultures within our society. And now it's like getting away from that is really, really hard, because even if one group or one individual has moved beyond that, maybe not everybody on the team has. People are uncomfortable. Leaders often haven't moved past it because they're measured on outcomes. So I think it's a really thorny puzzle. And the question is like, which Jenga pieces do we have to pull out to actually make room for that stuff?
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to come back to you both on resources for this, like what should be done at work. But for research I was doing a long time ago, I read this thing that basically said all metrics at work are a proxy for emotional conversation. And that shit blew my mind.
Does that have a name? That's great.
Right?
We should
I don't know who
coin
said that. I'm sorry. No credit given. But if you think about being in any kind of meeting where like we're looking at our sales number, or we're looking at the 9-box grid, or we're looking at the stock price or whatever, there is someone in that room who is having an emotional reaction to that number. And instead of the conversation being about the feeling of like doing a good job, the feeling of being valued, the feeling of belonging, the feeling of engagement, we are going to argue about whether we bumped the stock price in the right day of the week. That's bananas. Like, that is such a huge time suck. And so it's all, but like to your point about the mask, it's all part of this theater that we do where we go to work and we don't have feelings, and instead we have numbers and and I think it's wrong on a lot of levels. I think it's bad for society, but mostly I think it's a huge waste of time.
Right.
It's a huge waste of time for me to get the third follow-up email about not sending a signature when what someone actually wants is my care and attention. Yeah. What they actually want is for me to recognize that they're a person and that I'm ignoring them and that it is making them sad. And like, that's a much faster conversation than them agonizing over how to make a request of me in business speak. So we waste a phenomenal amount of time on this because we don't have the language to use to access our own feelings and make requests well. What's up, guys? Then also because we've been taught not to. And incidentally, I went to work the day after my dad died.
Oh, God.
True story. It did, and this is not a terribly sad story, but what it is so socialized to not even think that was weird.
Right.
Yeah.
No one said like, babe, should you maybe not be here right now?
Yeah.
No, they were just like, TikTok, it's comp season.
Way to get it.
We gotta wrap it up. I mean, I feel like that stuff happens all the time.
That's a horror show.
And we just like completely suppress our human experience so that we can show up at work and be automatons.
I like what you said about like the underlying needs thing, because I hadn't thought about that before, but there's talk in the therapy space about how everything is about belonging and acceptance, and it feels like the signature is just like, oh, do you accept me?
Are we doing this?
Do we belong? Are we together? Am I part of the group or the out group? And it's just, it permeates everything. And the thing I was going to say to your point about time waste is, what's really wild about it to me is not only does it waste time, and not only is it kind of adding this layer, but you also get all this leakage, to your point, where you can see, like, if you just pay attention, you can see emotional leakage everywhere. But that is just, like, that's what makes everything so fraught, is that you're trying to navigate around that, like, my boss seems irritated. I'm going to try to, like, satisfy that with more productivity instead of actually having the conversation we need to have about whether I'm a fit here or not.
Yeah. I never want to hear someone again say, how should I message this?
Oh, God.
Like, let's just not do that, because as it turns out, we are all humans talking to human beings, and it shouldn't take the amount of time and like cogitation that it takes to like really get it right and to be so neutral and to like strip out so much of the humanness of work that we can send a message to our boss.
There aren't really good parts about a pandemic, but if there was one of the silver linings, it was a lot of executives became a lot more vulnerable, right? You got a lot more visibility into each other's houses. The first all-hands Slack had in like whatever that was, actually almost exactly this time, 2020, was the 6 senior executives each going one at a time for 2 minutes, literally. What are your 1, 2, 3 in your organization to keep people focused? And Julie, our chief marketing officer, sat there, and all of a sudden her 2 daughters dive bombed her.
Nice.
And the outpouring of love, especially from working moms in the organization, was fantastic, because it was a recognition that she was going through this too. She may have set the kids up for it, but it was really good in terms of helping that out. And we've seen this time and time again, and now there's a little bit of like, okay, that was because there was a pandemic. We don't need to be vulnerable any longer.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we know that transparency and trust are really essential. We even see this in our data. If someone doesn't believe their leadership's being transparent with them, they are 2.3 times more likely to be headed out the door.
Yeah.
And it's understandable, right? It also gets at some of the stuff you guys are talking about, which is, if I don't think you trust me, then I'm not going to trust you either. I'm going to spend a lot of time and energy guessing what's going on in your head or what you're really planning.
So much.
And none of that is productive. All of that is waste.
Yeah. The other thing I want to talk about in the feelings category is the slippery slope myth, which is one of my least favorite conversations to have. So I feel like a lot of times when I start working with teams and we start making spaces for things like even just check-in rounds, just like just a scooch of humanity in the day, there is often, there's discomfort in some people, and then that discomfort translates to worst case scenario. This becomes like a therapy circle and not a workplace. We never get anything done again. And like Rodney, the number of times that someone has said like, Rodney opened this can of worms, and I'm like, bro, first of all, it's not a can of worms. It's your employee's literal emotional experience. So maybe calm down. And second of all, if it feels like a can of worms, if it feels like because we acknowledged some emotion or some conflict or some difficulty at work, that it has begotten us a bunch more of that, that's just signal that there's a bunch of unprocessed shit in your team.
Yep.
That's not a signal that you're going to be in that loop forever. It's a signal that you did a really bad job, and now that there's even a little bit of oxygen for that fire, it's going to burn.
Yep.
The truth is, if we put the right structures in place, it will burn itself out, because we will start to learn how to deal with conflict before it gets really toxic. We will start to learn to have more transparent conversations, so it isn't just like leaking all over into the organization.
Yeah.
But I feel like leaders will come to those conversations unskilled, and then their experiences, oh, this is messy, and my sense is it's just going to get messier from here. And I'm like, only if you're doing it badly.
Yeah. The other thing is, if you actually listen to people, they will tell you.
They will.
If you listen to them.
Turns out.
Yeah. I've done this twice now, where I've inherited a team or a product where when I got handed it, it was like, this product has some problems, right? It's got some challenges. It's not heading the right direction. The growth's not what we want it to be, all that. And you get in and you start talking to the team, you start figuring out, and you go, wait, we don't have a product problem. We have a culture problem.
Sure.
Because these people are not getting along with these people. These folks aren't talking. No one's listening to the folks over here that actually have a different idea and a solution. Why aren't they listening to them? Because they've never voiced it. Why haven't they ever voiced it? Because they don't feel like their word is worth anything to it, because they're too young, because they're a woman, because they're a different color than the majority of the group, or just because everybody else is talking over them all the time.
Yeah.
So getting in and understanding where the rhythms, habits, and cultural aspects of what's going on within any business are really the unlock. It's sort of back to culture eats strategy for breakfast, right?
Totally.
Feelings are like a credit card bill that you just don't want to look at, because you're like, oh, if I open that envelope, it's going to ruin everything. But it's there, it's compounding to your point, and you can pay it down.
Yeah.
But it's how big's the debt, and how long has it gone unaddressed, which I think is really scary. The only other thing I wanted to add about feelings, and this is a little bit of a cynical counterpoint to what you were saying, Brian, during the pandemic, there was a lot of authenticity and a lot of openness and a lot of like seeing the other side, seeing behind the mask.
Yeah.
But wildly, post-pandemic, we've seen this snap back to command and control, where it's like, all right, it's wartime now. The economy's down, funding's down, SVB is going under. We gotta man the ship and get on the guns, and that means no feelings.
That's right.
And it means productivity at all costs, and we're gonna just make all the tough calls.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the exact wrong direction at this time that's sort of electrically charged for it.
Yeah, it's back to that only I can fix it mentality too in some places. And that's a recipe for disaster over some period of time, obviously. There's nobody that, I'm sorry, at the end of the day is that sharp on everything to be able to do that.
Totally.
So how are you going to succeed? You've got to actually be willing to say, look, this is one of the things I try to coach leaders on. You've got to say, here's the mountain we're going to climb. Here's the big aspirational goals. Here's why our purpose matters. Here's what we mean to our customers. But at the same time, how are we going to get to the top of that mountain? I don't have all the answers. I need your help. right? I have to admit that I don't have all the answers, and I got to be willing to be vulnerable about that in order to engage you, because command and control isn't going to work in as complex, creative, global economy that we're working in today.
Yeah. Also, like, the command and control thing, I feel like the vibe of command and control is like, okay, now let's really get serious. And I'm like, what's more serious than people being able to deal with the most challenging conflict in a system? That it, like, when you inherit a product issue, when you inherit a transformation issue, when you inherit a strategy issue, there is always a conflict underneath it. There is always an unprocessed conflict. So when people say, like, let's get really serious about these growth numbers, I'm like, show me the cross-functional team that hates each other, and I will talk to you about these growth numbers, because that's what's going on for real, for real.
The people that don't talk to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the people who are meant to be collaborating and haven't spoken in 6 months. Because this is the Future of Work podcast, I'm also just going to, like, say, I think that every company should be making coaching and or therapy accessible to all employees. I think we should have these providers on staff. I think that there should be policies. If people don't want to go through official channels because of privacy, there should be, a spending limit underneath which any employee can access the help that they need. Because, again, to the point of, leaders absolutely are unequipped to do this. They should not be administering therapy because they don't know how. And that's a real conflict of interest, when you're also responsible for someone's incentive. But it is such an important part of work right now. We are knowledge workers, and, like, knowledge worker is head and heart. And we tend to put a lot of money aside to go to, like, the bullshit, Ivy League week-long MBA leadership blah blah that costs $20,000, but we can't find $200 a week for someone to access therapy who's in crisis at work. That seems off to me. That just seems like wildly off.
There was applause in the audience, and it was probably my team who needs therapy if I'm working with them.
Yeah, Brian's team. Let's get you all a therapist.
But the other word you used there was coaching, too. And a lot of executives think that they are good as coaches. And you ask the question, so when you're coaching, how often do you give people suggestions of what you think the right answer might be? And the answer is, I guess I do that. I'm like, yeah, that's not coaching.
Yeah, that's not
I'm not good at that either. I'm not good at coaching. I know the difference between the two.
Yeah.
But finding ways to help people come to the right answer themselves is really hugely valuable. So that way you don't have to be the ones giving them all the answers.
That's the thing.
I'm so glad you dropped that gauntlet, Rodney, because it feels like that is the move that's needed. And I was thinking of the hilarious metaphor when you were saying, like, the serious part. Imagine you go into the marriage counselor and you're like, the marriage is on the rocks, we need help. And they're like, let's get serious.
Right.
Pull out the budget.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
That's not how you do it, right?
That's not how you do it.
Those are not the moves. So I like the idea of reshaping, like, what is serious.
And again, to the same point, God, I'm really, like, on a soapbox today. We haven't done this in a minute, so I've got a lot stored up.
It's all built up.
To the point we were making earlier about flexibility, I've been an executive coach in my life. It does tend to be the people with the most privilege who also have access to those kinds of resources.
For sure.
And like, that's kind of wild, because, again, not that they don't need it. I think everybody should be in therapy. But it bifurcates these systems in a way that I find to be deeply unhelpful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's compounding the problem.
Exactly.
Yep.
Should we do the last one?
Sure.
Myth number 5.
Your island, man.
All right. This one was controversial even when we were talking about how to include it and whether it's interesting or not. This myth is you can't build culture if you're not in person and at the office together. And the conversation out in the wild is like, we got to bring everybody back to the office. And often it's categorized as back to work.
Yeah.
As if we weren't working before.
Which is just annoying to people.
Yeah.
So annoying. It's annoying to me right now.
It's
and it's
annoying
not even
all
happening.
the time. So I guess the question is, can you build culture remotely?
Yeah.
What is the role of in-person, and how do you parse that, Brian?
So first off, like, we wrestled this ourselves with Slack's executive team back in 2021.
I bet.
The phrase we came back with, because we had a pretty broad range of opinions, was digital first doesn't mean never in person. There actually is an essential ingredient of getting people together in person. My own team does it at least once a quarter. We find a way to do it. Because that time together that's much more about socialization and meals together and having fun together is really important. But every day that you work together, whether it's you're together in the office or you're remote, you're doing things that actually exhibit culture, right?
Yeah.
The behaviors you've got. We kick off every meeting on Monday morning, thank you very much, with an icebreaker. It's our check-in question, right? So it might be, I think the longest we ever went was 20 minutes debating where do people stand on pumpkin spice.
Nice.
Pumpkin spice lattes.
That's
Is
a
it
tough
thing?
one.
Is it not a
It's a
thing?
hard no.
Yeah, it's a hard no. I learned that it's actually not pumpkin in it. It's just all the
I know,
spices.
it's nutmeg and cloves and
yeah.
something else you have in your
Still
cabinet.
not getting you there? Okay.
Nope.
Sorry, Rodney.
Sorry, man.
But the culture itself, at the end of the day, isn't the slogans that you put up on the wall. It's how you treat people, right?
Sure.
It's what do you say is important? How do you treat your customers? How do you treat your employees? Who gets promoted? Who gets rewarded? That's how people think and experience the culture of your organization. In our research, what we found is there's about 25% of executives that actually tell us that culture is like their number one concern about why they're pushing people back into the office. But if you give people flexibility, they're 57% more likely to say their company's culture has improved over the past 2 years. And flexibility, more than executive narrative, more than what's our purpose, more than compensation systems, is the number one driver of that improvement. So it turns out giving people flexibility to do their work when and when they're at their best, showing them that trust, focusing on outcomes, kind of builds a better culture.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I hate it. No, look, I think it's all of a piece, right? I think it's all feels like a similar thread, which is we're organizing our way of working around the preference of a small group and around tradition.
Yeah.
And to me, the idea of like, you know, work in a coffee shop, work in a cave, work in an office. Well, what are you doing for work?
Yep.
Because maybe if you're an author, being in a cave would be really good for you. And maybe if you're in marketing, sitting in your customer's office would be really good for you. And maybe if you're a salesperson, going to an event like this would be really good for you. I don't know your life. I'm just saying the narrative is about the rule, not about the work. And that's the part of it that I find really confounding. And when I talk to leadership teams who are wrestling with this and have been wrestling with it for 3 years, and I'm like, napkin math, how much is the hybrid conversation costing you in executive team hours? It's millions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So you're laying people off at the same time as you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in executive compensation debating whether we're in the office on Tuesdays and Thursdays or not. That's so nuts. That's so nuts to me. That's bananas. So I'm like, you know, like with everything else, it's like, you know, agency, like put the decision close to the work, design the work experience for the work that needs to be done, and let the people who have to do the work make the decision about it within reason. Is my hottest take.
Way too
Lovely.
rational.
Way too rational for this life.
I guess I object to the premise right out of the gate.
Let's do that.
Because we do this with brand and we do it with culture where we say the word like it's a thing we get to choose to do or not do.
Yeah.
So can you build culture? You're always building culture.
Yeah,
You're always
happening.
building brand. You're always establishing how things are. And you can have a remote culture. You can have a hybrid culture. You can have an in-person culture. And to your point, it should match whatever the heck it is that you're doing.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, it's already there. The question isn't can you build culture remotely? It's what kind of culture are you building remotely?
Yeah.
One of distrust, one of 8 hours of Zoom a day, one of no asynchrony, one of, you know, people are always trying to blend work and life and can't get it right. Or have you built one where it's like, oh yeah, we meet these times, we don't these times, we're totally flexible to your point, and then as a result the culture feels the way we want it to feel. So it's like you're doing it no matter what, you're just doing it bad.
Yeah.
And stop doing it so badly.
Yeah. Also, I want to just say for people who never listen to our show and definitely don't plan to after this, there's one thing that that just like brought up for me, which is anytime you're in a company and there are cycles and cycles and cycles to like figure it out like this, like the hybrid work thing, you can't because there isn't one right answer.
Right.
Yeah.
And if I just feel like if particularly leaders and managers could just understand that more digging, more meetings, more more SWAT teams, they're not going to get to the right answer because there isn't one right answer. There's only experimentation and learning and spreading what works and shedding what doesn't, and that's the whole name of the game. And I just feel like instead they do the opposite, which is like, wow, well, this is really hard. We should bring in like six more people. Do more. Like maybe let's get into a room together and really like game it out. And I'm
Maybe
like, do
McKinsey
the
knows.
opposite of
Oh.
that. Like,
Yeah.
whatever you're about to do,
But
don't do it.
But to your point, Rodney, that's a narrative violation of Taylorism.
Yeah.
The idea that there isn't one best right way
right.
is like, well, that's right. That's not in the management playbook.
Right.
So it's like we haven't allowed ourselves that humility.
Right.
To be like, there isn't a right way. There's going to be trade-offs. Let's just pick the ones that match our flavor.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what kind of cake do you want to bake?
Yeah, we can't
What's
figure
the-
it out.
What's the best right cake?
And some percentage of people are going to hate it no matter what we do.
Yeah. And then they
that's
don't
how it
work here
goes.
anymore eventually.
That's how it goes.
And that's how it works.
The one way that I'd seen teams actually work this out is keeping the high level conversation about principles.
Yeah.
Can we get aligned around the principles, right?
Yeah.
That
we
matter to
can't.
us, and then can we put we may not get there, but you should at least
love
try.
to.
Let's attempt. Let's
right?
endeavor.
Pull them together and make the executives themselves talk about it. Not how many days a week,
Right.
but what are the core principles that we think are true, and what are the guardrails, what are the extremes that we allow on either side of this, and then let people operate within that in the way that they need to.
Well,
100%.
principled org design is a great place to draw
Love
things
it.
to a close on an episode of Brave New Work. So I'm going to shut it down. We really want to say thanks to Slack and everyone here for hosting us at South by Southwest. This was really fun. We've never done the live thing, and it
Would
has
you
a-
again?
I like the feedback.
What's the NPS
I
on
like
this?
the feedback. NPS 9.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Somebody
Wow.
invite us
Real-
somewhere.
Somebody invite us
But
somewhere.
that's your score. Not we got a 9 on an NPS scale.
That's right,
Which would
that's
be
right.
abysmally.
I hope not.
Yeah.
That would be bad.
Brian, thank you so much for talking to us. Friend of the pod,
Yeah.
Brian. Second
Third?
time? Third?
Second time.
Second time.
Second time. All
Second. We love a repeat guest. Thanks for doing this with us.
Thanks for having me.
It was
Appreciate
a real
it,
joy. And for all of you, if you don't listen to our show and you didn't hate this, please find us wherever you listen to podcasts. It's called Brave New Work, and we would love to have you.
There you have it. Thanks all.
Thanks,
As
everybody.
always, go
Southwest.
change something.